Working Man Investor. Today's video, the future of the dollar. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world, so that means this isn't just the United States that uses the dollar. Other countries use it to settle transactions in the global economy and to use it as a form of savings. Currently, the dollar is the most trusted currency in the world. There are a lot of perks to being the reserve currency of the world. One, commodities such as gold, silver, and oil are priced in dollars. It also allows us to borrow money in our own currency. Unfortunately, that has also led to a huge deficit. So the way this works is the United States government taxes our people. When they tax our people, the hope is that we'll bring in enough tax revenue to cover things such as our military, our infrastructure, our social programs. However, that has not been the case for a couple of decades now. So what we've had to do is use debt through the form of selling treasuries to cover what our taxes don't. So I do want to define a couple of definitions here for you because I hear people try to use them interchangeably and they use them incorrectly. National deficit and national debt. National deficit is the amount of debt the United States government must take on to cover their expenses in a year. So at the end of the year, any money that we owe that we couldn't cover in taxes, that we've had to borrow, is our deficit. The national debt is the amount of money that is accumulated over the years of running a deficit. So the way the government gets the debt is by issuing U.S. treasuries. A treasury is nothing more than a loan to a government. They're sold at auction, and people that can bid on this can be anybody from our American citizens, our businesses, our banks, other countries' businesses. It can be other countries. At this time, China and Japan are our biggest buyers of debt, of U.S. treasuries. And this does give the United States unlimited spending power. However, it does come with consequences. The debt levels keep going up every year. So the United States keeps spending more than they're bringing in taxes. All this debt has led to a second problem because at the making of this video, we're $36 trillion in debt. Interest payments on our debt are getting expensive. U.S. governments must pay interest on their debt. If you buy a treasury, like I'll use the 10-year because I follow it, the 10-year treasury pays a 4.2% interest rate roughly at the making of this video. That 4.2% interest is debt service. That's the amount that we have to pay back along with the principal. So that gets expensive. So all of our tax dollars are getting to the point where they're starting to go just to cover the spending that the United States government has already done. As of 2025, the making of this video, we have $36 trillion in debt. $9 trillion need to be refinanced. We want the interest rates hopefully to be as low as we possibly can get them on these treasuries. The way that works is when these go to bid, the more people you have bidding on it, it'll raise the price of the treasury but lower the yield. The yield is just the interest rate. So it's supply and demand. If you got a lot of people that want our debt, and it's going to get the treasuries go up in price to buy and the interest rate is less. That's good. That means our debt service will be less. But if we get to the point where we have fewer people bidding and we have more treasuries to sell than people bidding, then the price of the treasury gets lower. It gets cheaper to buy and the yield, the interest rate that it pays goes up. It's good for the investor. That's bad for the United States though, because that interest rate goes up on $36 trillion in debt. It gets really expensive for us to pay that interest rate. And we can get to the point where our tax dollars are simply going just to cover interest and not pay the principal down. That then hurts our social services and our infrastructure. You drive down the street in the winter and the road's full of potholes and you're mad and saying, well, all the tax money I'm paying, I can't have a smooth street to drive on. This is part of the reason why we have so much debt. And if interest rates keep going up, as our debt gets higher, what's going to happen is people that bid on our treasuries, they're going to demand a higher interest rate because when you have more debt, it's more risk to loan to your country, same as with a business. So in turn, they'll want a better return on their investment. So they're going to want a higher interest rate. Again, this makes our debt more expensive to service, to pay, and keep borrowing from. So why does the government spend so much? Well, the economy runs off of spending. Remember, one person's spending is another person's income, and the government is currently the biggest spender. So when the United States government starts cutting spending, they start laying people off, canceling contracts. That starts cutting funding and causes people to lose their job. When this happens, it doesn't just affect the government. If we look around and start seeing other people lose their jobs, what do? Even if we know our job is pretty secure, we have a tendency to get a little nervous and we start cutting our spending. We start looking at things. Maybe I only need this streaming service. I don't need all these other ones because I don't watch them this much. Maybe I don't need a gym membership. I can jog through my subdivision. Things like that. All that cutting and spending reduces demand, which then can cause a recession. So the government's in a very difficult situation because then the only other thing that they can do is raise taxes to try to cover the deficit. And ideally, you really want to do both. You want to cut spending and raise taxes if you're serious about attacking the debt, but that is extremely painful. But just cutting spending alone is painful, and not cutting spending but raising taxes is very painful because nobody wants their taxes to be raised. And if this isn't addressed, then the government will have to keep borrowing and getting deeper and deeper in debt. The problem with this is it causes inflation. When the government must borrow money from the central bank, more dollars enter our economy. So you get more dollars chasing goods and services. This increased in the money supply used to purchase goods and services, then prices to go up. So prices start to go up because there's more money grabbing goods and services faster than they can be produced and manufactured. So prices start to go up so they can try to find equilibrium. In the process of this, the value of each individual's dollar is losing buying power. So the average American is losing buying power because their money can't buy as much because prices are going up. And by the time the average person gets a raise, a lot of times, because wage increases takes a time to get a raise, a lot of times by the time you get that raise, your savings account has been depleted and you're making more money, but you're in worse shape, especially if the prices are sticky. The inflation is sticky and the prices aren't going to go back down. You're not going to get deflation anytime soon. Even if they're able to break the back of inflation and hold it right where it is, if you've tapped through half of your emergency fund just to make ends meet, by the time you get your raise, you're already hurting. And to make it even worse, if the inflation was bad enough, the person who bears, obviously, the blunt of this is the average person, but by the time you get your raise, it may not be enough to cover the inflation. I'll give you an example. From 2020 to 2025, the average salary went up 20%. That sounds pretty decent. Over 5 years, you get a 20% raise. However, inflation in that same 5 years was 23%. So we're all 3% poorer. That's why we're all feeling the crunch still, even though inflation has slowed down. And I also want to point out here that the stock market over that same period ripped up 80%. This is why investors who understand what is happening and how money works and how inflation works got rich, while the average person who doesn't understand inflation got absolutely crushed. It's why it's important that you understand the importance of investing. So another issue with the United States having such a huge deficit is that it affects the interest rates on treasuries. That matters because the United States has a debt problem. And other countries worry about the United States repaying their debts. Like I described earlier, we got a huge debt problem. Countries that are going to invest and buy our bonds are going to want a higher interest rate to pay that back. So due to this, the interest rates it might have to go up. If we don't get enough people bidding on treasuries, remember what happens. It's a supply and demand. The interest rate goes up and the bond is cheaper. When the interest rate goes up, your interest rates are going to go up too. As the treasury goes up, mortgage rates will go up. Mortgage rates and the 10-year treasury often compete for the same investor because the 10-year treasury is considered a safe investment because it's backed by the United States government. The United States government never defaults on their treasuries. And the mortgage-backed security has a little more risk, but it's still considered a safe investment. But because it has more risk, it has a little bit higher interest rate than the 10-year treasury, usually 2 to 2.5%. So if our 10-year treasuries are going for 4.5% interest, mortgage-backed securities are probably paying about 6%. So that'll raise your interest rate. When the 10-year yield goes up, mortgage rates often go up. When the 10-year yield goes down, mortgage rates will often follow that. So higher 10-year treasury rates will increase your mortgage, they're going to increase your car loans, and they're going to increase your credit card bills too, your credit card interest rate. What also goes up, and a lot of people don't think about this, is loans to businesses. That matters because businesses that have to pay higher interest rates on their loans, it costs them more money, it can affect their profit margin. So when their profit margin gets affected, what happens? They lay people off, they have salary freezes, or they have hiring freezes. This all can lead to job loss and recessions. Furthermore, if the government must pay more in interest rates, that means it has less to pay for infrastructure and other special programs because, as I said earlier, the tax dollars simply aren't going to be able to pay off the higher debt service from the higher interest rate. And so instead of providing the services for paying taxes, they're just paying off the interest rate. They're never paying down the principal. People that are in credit card debt, what is one of the first things they tell you to do when you're in debt? One, quit using credit card, and two, don't make the monthly payment, because if your principal on your credit card is too high and you're only making the monthly payment, say is $20, say you're paying $20 but your interest rate equals $25, you're falling deeper in the hole by $5 every month. Same thing can start happening here with the United States, and in a lot of ways is happening. Is as the interest rates on the treasuries climb, our debt service gets more expensive, so we'll just be paying off interest and we won't be able to pay down that $36 trillion debt. This is what Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, said last year when he said the path we're on is not sustainable. Same with your credit card. If you keep making the minimum payment and keep charging and jacking that bill up and the interest keeps going up, eventually you go bankrupt. Now, the United States, since we are the reserve currency of the world, we won't necessarily go bankrupt. So what we do is we'll not likely debt default, meaning we'll refuse to pay. What we'll likely do is we would just print a bunch of money and pay off that debt, but that will inflate the US dollar. And this won't happen until the United States is about done as the top empire in the world and the reserve currency of the world. But this is one of the ways it could go. You can print as you want because you're the reserve currency of the world and you pay off the debt, but that causes hyperinflation and you lose your reserve currency status. So at this point, the United States government is getting into a difficult situation where they're going to have to possibly cut spending and raise taxes. Even now, Trump still wants to cut taxes. We're getting to the point where they have to cut spending and raise taxes. Both options are painful. If the government gets to the point where they're serious about wanting to balance the budget and reducing expenses and increasing income is the only way to do it. That's what I got for you today. Working man investor, keep grinding, people.